Now, when we've talked about a lot of religions. Now, basically we've looked at 5. Yeah, 5. And certainly Christianity and Islam and Judaism have a lot in common. What do they have in common?
One deity.
Okay, they have one deity, although our Jewish and Muslim friends would disagree, that Christians do, but we see we're monotheistic. What else are similarities?
They follow the structure,
Like the Ten Commandments.
Teachings and
not
stuff.
the Ten Commandments.
They've all got structure, okay?
They have one source of, like they have the Quran and
Okay, sacred writing.
sacred writing.
Yeah, Quran or the Torah, what the Jews would consider the Biblos, which would be the Old Testament, and Christians, I think I told you in Greek, Biblos is book. That's the book. So when you say the Bible, it is the Biblos. It's the book. So they have a sacred book that's not one of a lot of books that are sacred, but a book. Which means if you look at, if you look beneath the surface, they all come from a common source. They're all Abrahamic religions, so they see their origin in Abraham. They see the creation story is the same. There's so much similarity between those 3 religions, and yet with all the similarities, you can't be 2 of them at the same time. Even though there's a lot of interconnection, even historically in the way they developed, you cannot be a Muslim Jew. You can't do it, because to be one or the other, you've got to give up the other. To be a Muslim, you can't be a Jew anymore if you convert. If you convert to Judaism, and as a Christian, you can't be a Jewish Christian because you view God in a fundamentally different way. You may say you're ethnically Jewish and believe in Christianity, Messianic Jews, but you got to give up something really fundamental about Judaism to do that. So you're calling yourself that, but a Jew would say, no, you aren't. You're not Jewish. You're not Jewish religiously anymore. And it's the same thing with Islam, even though Islam has Jesus Christ as part of, one of the prophets that Muslims value, the second highest of all. So it's interesting that they're exclusive religions. You can't be more than one. And that applies to the Eastern religions too. You can't be a Muslim Buddhist, or you can't be a Christian Hindu. You can't do it. Eastern religions, we've seen this, is different. They're less rigid in terms of their theology or their doctrine. And in fact, we're going to see tonight, we've got 2 religions, and if you bring in Buddhism as a third, that really complement one another. And in fact, people are generally more than one. So it's not like I am Confucian, but you are Taoist. You're probably both, with a little Hindu, a little Buddhist thrown in. And most Shintos practice Buddhism too. So Zen Buddhism is strong in Japan. So we're moving into an area where you're not, the Taoists aren't converting the Confucians. The Shintos aren't looking to get the Buddhists, because they're all working together and complementing one another. Something that you don't see in the West. I mean, instead of complementing one another, generally we're killing one another. We're having crusades where we're wiping groups out. But then we do that within Christianity too, and Muslims do it within Islam. So that's not new and exciting. All right, we're going to be looking at these 3 East Asian religions, Far East. And do y'all have any kind of perception or stereotype, any image of religion in the Far East? Now, we've talked about the Indian religions, Hinduism and Buddhism, which developed out of, the South Asia. But do you have any preconceptions or understandings of Far Eastern religion? Like, we're going to be looking at Confucianism, Taoism, and Shintoism. Does that bring any images up or any prior knowledge?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good, because blank slates are easier to write on.
Sounds like we should burn incense.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Good. That's a good one. Then we think of the East as sort of with incense and foggy temples. Going into sort of a mystical thing. We're going to be looking at Confucian. One of the things we're going to see is that Chinese, other than Shinto, is distinctively Japanese. But both Confucianism and Taoism are Chinese and actually came about the same time in China. So Confucian, Taoist thought, that's what we're going to look at. Confucianism we'll look at first, and it's all grounded in Confucius. Now, back in the 70s, comedians would say, I remember comedians, Confucius say, and then you come up with something silly, a piece of wisdom, which kind of tells us a little bit about Confucius, right? Confucius lived before Jesus, 500, somewhere in the 5th century, and he had a real interesting background. He was born into poverty. So his family, and he's a historical person, we know that. When we talk about Taoism, its founder's a little different. But Confucianism, he's a real person, and he came from a real poor background, and he lost his parents. So it was a real struggle for him as a younger man. And maybe because he struggled so much, he had to take menial jobs. So he didn't have important jobs, but he had a lot of ambition.
Working in AutoZone.
No, he would have loved to work at AutoZone. In fact, what's interesting is he was the founder of AutoZone, only they said it in Chinese. What's that? Yes, that's exactly right. Only they had to do all the repairs with chopsticks. It was very difficult then. And so he took menial jobs, but he was ambitious, and so he educated himself in order to achieve, and he did a good job, and ended up rising in society until he held an important position in the Sui dynasty, the government of China. He was sort of minister of justice. One of the things, though, that as he was growing and going through these menial jobs and working hard and educating himself, how do you think that would affect a person? If life was a real struggle and they had to earn. Nothing came easy for Confucius. How do you think that would affect an individual once they've gotten older, or even once they've attained success?
It'd be more non-material.
Okay, there would be less material than if it was just
Because you
handed
had
to
to
them.
work hard to
Okay.
get it, so you'd appreciate it more.
You might appreciate what you had more. You'd be less material, so your values might be shaped more on
Conservatism.
being conservative with what you have. You think you might develop a work ethic, working hard. Yeah.
Persevere, for sure.
Persevering. Okay. Well, that's what happened with Confucius. He worked so hard and attained this, has this hard work ethic, values honesty. That's a big deal. that he worked hard, he earned it, he kind of did it the right way. He reaches this high level in Chinese society and then looks around him. And when you've reached that high level in government and you look around the people you're working with, do you think at this high level, the people that's working around him, that they have necessarily these same values? Now, Donna, you're shaking your head. Why would you say maybe not?
Coming from different backgrounds.
Okay,
it would be
coming-
a big thing.
Coming from different backgrounds. Remember, we're talking about a society before Jesus Christ. So we're talking about a society before the Roman Empire, although you wouldn't go on east. So, this is early. So you're surrounded by people that are really, really different. You have worked yourself up and attained and reached the high level, but you're surrounded by people who maybe didn't. And if this is sort of handed to them, if they didn't have to work hard, how might their perspective be a little different than yours?
Not nearly as of importance.
What's that?
It wouldn't be nearly as important.
Okay,
If you're renting a place versus owning a place, you take care of it differently, because as a renter, I don't own it. But if you're owning it yourself, if I put a hole in the wall, I gotta fix it. So
you appreciate
Right.
the things that you have. One of the other things he saw, and we have overcome this isn't part of our government anymore, and so we can be thankful. But when he reaches the top, not only is he seeing people that don't work hard, they don't value what they have.
yeah.
They don't treat people very well, because the people around them are exactly. What were you demonstrating when you kind of turned
Snobby.
kind of snobby, because they've always had it. So you look down on the people. Confucius couldn't look down on the people because he was one of them. And he went up, so he has this appreciation for, he's around people that don't appreciate their position. They look down on the ones around them. They're playing all kinds of games at the top, because their values are shaped by things that haven't shaped his. And he see a lot of them are corrupt. Now again, that's foreign to us, because there is absolutely no corruption in government anymore.
When did that start?
So he sees the people that are around him aren't really nice people. They're not good. And so he becomes very disillusioned and wants, sort of not unlike Siddhartha Gautama, who goes and searches for truth. He leaves this high status and heads west to see if he can kind of figure out what's wrong with the society in which he's in. It's also a turbulent time. Part of what made him really question whether he was on the right track was that the empire, in China they talk about dynasties, and dynasties are involved with families, and they had a very interesting view of how God blesses dynasties. And this dynasty, the Zhou dynasty in which he was working, was facing a lot of pressure from outside and from inside. So it was really shaky. And he started thinking that maybe the reason it was shaky was that there was so much corruption and people weren't living the way they were supposed to. They weren't applying good principles to their living. And so he left to develop some ideas. And with him took 5,000 students as he moved. So it was quite a little group. And he starts teaching them how he believes society should be run, how we should relate to one another. And from his ideas, you get certain themes that are Confucian thought. One is humanness, and just being human. Now, what would be positive, the virtues that would be associated with being human? Good, a good human being. How would you describe a good guy?
Cares about others.
Cares about others. How do you care about others? What enables us to care about others?
Visiting them, helping them.
Okay, visiting them,
Encouraging
helping them.
supporting them.
Okay. Trying to understand what's making them kind of work, empathizing with them. Confucius said that humanness is really important. We got to get to know the people around us, and we got to care about them. And because the people he was working with in the high level of government, they didn't care. But he says, for society to work effectively, people have to care about one another. When you talk about caring about one another, your concern, Confucius said, should start at home. And you should have, a sense of family piety, respecting one's parents. That's sort of the key. Now, why would he say that respecting your parents, why would he consider that the key to living a virtuous life, a good human life? Why might he say that? Why would he begin to think that developing this kind of empathy, this humanness, why would he assume that would begin at home?
Well, if you have somebody to respect at home, you're gonna respect others.
Okay, if you grow up respecting.
Your parents, that's gonna carry over into how you treat other people.
So you're learning the virtues as you grow up.
Yeah.
Okay, and he says that's important. Humanness, empathy, compassion, but also learning it within family. Therefore, parent, and we'll talk about that in a minute, the different relationships he saw. So that's where this develops. Talks about ritual propriety, and this is kind of an illustration that it's important to use proper etiquette.
Manners.
Yeah, to be well mannered.
Yeah.
Now, why would this be so? Why do you think this would be so important to him, given his background and his frustration, that you've got to use proper manners and etiquette? What does that convey to other people? If you use good manners that are sort of socially accepted, what is that communicating to other people?
You could bring them up.
Okay, shows that you were brought up right. Okay. What are you telling the people? So it's illustrating your background, your humanness. What is it conveying to the other people?
Respect.
Okay, it's showing that you respect them, right? Why would it show respect? Why would following certain rules of etiquette, certain manners, why would that be so important? Why does that convey respect? Respect for the other. What do you think?
Well, you have your common courtesies that people don't have now.
Okay.
So, but being a common courtesy thing just not important in this day and age, it seems.
Okay, so it also conveys what's truly important, in the courtesy that you show. Respect, showing respect for the other person. How might it do that?
Yeah,
It shows care and concern.
Okay, it's showing, even if it's kind of ritual, that there are certain things you do, it's, conveying concern and respect for the others. It also becomes kind of an educating thing, because you are showing other people and they can emulate your actions as they respond. So for Confucius, this if you want to develop this kind of empathy and compassion, you need to learn how to be polite. You need to know how to relate to individuals. And for him, the noble person, the ideal individual, is the one who rises to the top by being a good moral individual rather than from family. What then would he consider important in making a truly noble? Now this doesn't necessarily mean the ruler, because that may not apply to him, but a noble ruler or a noble person is somebody who achieves their status through moral living, good etiquette, good humanness, family values. Why would that be important? What is that saying about how he sees true importance in an individual?
You gotta work for it.
Okay, it's something that you work for, you develop. Now, if you look at all of these are things you can learn, right? I mean, you can learn to respect your parents. You can learn to sort of identify with the people around you. You can certainly learn rules of etiquette, how to relate to one another. So Confucian becomes this educational system where people can learn how to become noble people. Now, Confucius also believed that there were certain relationships that were key. And we've already talked about, when you look at all of those, humanness involves empathy, and empathy has to have another. It's not just internal morality. It's all of the Confucian ideas involve your relationship with others. For me to feel empathy, I've got to have another person. For me to have respect in my family, I got to have a family. I can't be alone. For me to practice etiquette, I can't do it by myself. Etiquette is always involved with other people. And so for Confucian, there are key relationships in which these ideas work. The relationship between ruler and subject was one. Now, given what he says about this empathy and compassion and etiquette that shows respect, what would you imagine? And there's a little explanation there. But what would you imagine would be a good relationship between the ideal ruler and his or her subjects?
He treats them fairly.
Okay, the ruler would treat his subjects fairly. Why would he treat them fairly?
Because it shows respect.
Okay, because it shows
It's the
respect.
proper thing to do.
Yeah, it shows empathy. How about subjects? How would the subjects relate to their rulers?
Hopefully with respect.
Okay, with respect. Now, understand, since etiquette is a big deal, there might be rituals that would convey the respect the ruler has for his subjects and the respect subjects have to the ruler. It can be formalized into sort of ethical standards or rituals to convey that. Father and son, fundamental relationship. How should a good father treat his son? Given what Confucian has already said, how should a father treat his son? Knock him around every now and then, right?
Make them tough.
Punch his teeth out.
Yeah.
Hopefully
Yeah,
with
knock a
love.
few teeth.
Hopefully with love.
How should a good father treat his son? How would a noble, because a noble person is the one who achieves by being a good, moral, empathetic person. How would a good, noble father relate to his sons? To his
Set
son?
an example.
Okay, set an example. Would he treat his sons kindly?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Would he show respect to his sons?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. How about sons to fathers?
Encourage him.
Okay, well, father would encourage sons, right? How about sons to fathers?
They should respect them.
Show respect. Okay. How about husbands and wives?
Oh boy.
Oh, boy.
Slap them around.
Oh, yeah, you can do anything. Yeah,
Yeah.
just, yeah. And that put the husbands on a low level. How would husbands and wives relate to one another?
With kindness. and
Yeah, you're doing kindness.
understanding and
Now,
listening.
understand, you've got roles, so in the society, so the men would provide, but they're providing with compassion. The women would work for the good of the family, but would do with empathy. How about different ages within families, older brother, younger brother? What would be the relationship between those two? If they're following what Confucius taught, what role would the older brother play?
Protective.
Okay, the older brother would be protective, the older brother would, what,
Lead the younger one.
what's that?
Lead the other one.
Lead the younger one, okay. How about the younger one?
Respect and look up to his older brother.
Respect, look out. Now, if he's looking up to his brother, what would he be doing? How would he show that he's looking up to his brother? What would be the ways? If the brother is sort of teaching, mentoring, guiding, that's part of the older brother because he cares about his younger brother. He wants his younger brother to succeed. What would the younger brother do in this little system?
Try to
Listen to
imitate
him.
him.
Okay, we'll try to imitate him, which means he'd have to listen, right? Okay, and learn from the older. All of these are these relationships. And he also talks about the relationship, well, the fifth relationship is friend to friend. And that's different than the other four. Because each of the other four has one that has more power than the other. So the one with power is looking with sympathy towards the lower, and the lower is looking with respect to the higher. It's a recognition of a difference. The higher is trying to lift up the lower is trying to be lifted up, is allowing himself to be lifted up. But friends to friend is different, because friend to friend, you're equal. So if you've got two people that are equal, that are following this sort of guidance, how would they relate to one another? How would these two equals relate to one another?
Be on their best behavior all the time.
Okay, they'd be on the best behavior. Now, remember, we got two on the same level. So what would those two be doing for one another?
Competition.
Well, would you be in competition? If you're noble people, if this is what you're striving to be, you're striving to be noble, to demonstrate this humanness, to demonstrate empathy and compassion. Would you be in competition with your friend? No. What would you be trying to do?
Build him up.
Good! You're building one another up, right? Because you want your friend to
Succeed like you.
succeed like you. And he's trying to build you up. So it's sort of a mutuality of supporting and building one another. Now, this is Confucius. This is what Confucius taught. Now, if his philosophy is accepted, what kind of society are you going to end up with? In other words, if China decides, or the rulers decide, that this is a philosophy we're going to apply, how does it shape society? What kind of society are we going to see?
Positive one.
Okay, positive. Why would we end up seeing a positive society?
Well, because everybody is going to be respectful and to everybody else.
Okay? How would that society define success? What would be a successful person in that society if they bought into what Confucius was teaching?
What do you mean?
Well, what kind of, how would they view like a good ruler, a good king? How would they view that?
He cares for the people and he's just with the
Okay.
people.
Okay? Now, if you look at a society like this, what would be some strengths in this society? In a society that's guided by these rules?
It appears that people get along.
Okay, if it's guided by these rules, more likely the people are going to get along than not. Okay? What else? What would be some strengths?
There shouldn't be any robberies or,
Why wouldn't there be any robberies?
because you're treating everybody as if you wanted to be treated.
Okay, so there's, you don't have the anger, the hatred, you're not taking things away from other people. Okay, good. What else?
Probably people work hard.
Okay, people working hard. All right. So you're giving me some positive things, right? Because I asked for strengths. What might be some weaknesses in a society guided by Confucian thoughts? Confucian ideas. What might be some weaknesses?
Some of the roles they might feel like they're inferior to others.
Okay. How so? Tell me more.
Well, like in the examples you gave, it's kind of like one is more of the leader and one is more of the follower,
Okay.
The father's over the son, the husband's over the wife, the elder brother's over the brother, the ruler's over the subject.
Well, that's the way it is. No?
I want the Riddiger house.
So what you're saying is one of the weaknesses could be that it becomes kind of rigid. The rulers are always rulers, and they look down on subjects, and subjects are always subjects, and they look up to rulers. And the rulers are compassionate, and the subjects do what they're supposed to do with respect, but that doesn't change. Those who rule, those who are subject to. Husbands are always here, wives are always here, fathers are always here, sons are always here, older brothers are here. And it can become rigid, okay, and kind of frustrating. Okay, good. And I think that is a real weakness. Kind of going in that same direction. This is, if I want to know how to relate to my friend, or if I want to know how to relate to my wife, we've developed some etiquette, right, to sort of formalize that so that we're not trying to recreate the wheel every time. So there are certain things that we can do. I can do for my friend, with my friend, to show respect that he would reciprocate, or that my wife, as the one who has authority, there are certain things that I will do and she will do in response. What could happen to those rituals that may be an issue? What could be a problem with those rituals that we develop, that might be developed to show that kind of status and respect?
Snootiness.
What's that?
Snootiness.
Okay, it could lead to the idea of sort of snooty superiority.
Yeah.
It can also kind of become so rigid. The rituals themselves become so rigid, they lose meaning. They become ritual without meaning.
Going through the motions.
That's exactly right. It no longer is a ritual showing respect.
No,
It's just something you do.
yeah.
In fact, it becomes so rigid that even if you might feel respect, it doesn't happen because it is so fixed and formal. I remember when I was in church, growing up in Presbyterian church, we every Sunday said the Apostles' Creed. Every Sunday we said the Apostles' Creed. Every Sunday. And I understand why they started doing it, because it's a good summary of the Christian faith. But I grew up with it, and we said it every single Sunday. And what we used to do was see how fast we could say it from memory, which meant it had no meaning at all, because we said it so stupid often. We weren't even thinking about the words anymore. We were just rattling them off. Something can become so ritualized that it loses meaning. And what happened with Confucian thought, it became, these ideas were accepted in China, and they were taught as principles, like in schools. And in fact, it was the Confucian, your ability to know the Confucian rules, the right etiquette, the right words, the right relationship, that enabled you to succeed. And those rituals over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years that are passed on and on and on and on and on become so formal and rigid that they end up losing meaning. You also push out any new ideas that's resulting from a changing world. That's on the outside. You're accepting these ancient rules into the 19th century. Chinese are still following these rules of etiquette, 1,000 years after they were developed, 2,000 years after they were developed. And that becomes a problem. But that's Confucianism. Now, as we talked about Confucianism, and I'm calling this a religion, what is lacking in Confucianism? What have we not talked about at all?
A central being to worship.
Yeah, we don't have a God. We don't have anything to worship here. And that's really important in Confucianism. You really don't have any kind of worship, although the relationship between father and son or within families leads to a respect for members of the family that are no longer there. But you don't have deities. You don't have gods. It's really what you do. It's how you act. And so that becomes sort of an emptiness in Confucianism, and that's why Confucianism ends up complementing another Chinese religion called Taoism. Now, have you ever heard the word Taoism?
Yeah.
Well, there was a book written, and I'm thinking in the 70s, The Tao of Pooh, and the writer took Winnie the Pooh, the story of Winnie the Pooh, to find truth, deeper truth. We'll talk about what the word Tao means in a minute. Now, this becomes the great symbol of Taoism, and you've seen that before.
Uh-huh.
Does anybody know what that is?
Yin
Yin yang.
Yin, that's right, yin and yang. And always, it should be black and white, because that's what's intended. Now, do you know what yin and yang represents? Now, like I said, it's supposed to be black and white. In fact, this is on the South Korean flag, this symbol of Taoism. What do you think it could represent? Just looking at how it's organized. Because you've got white and you've got black, but you've got an equal amount of both colors. So you don't have one larger than the other, right?
Equality.
Yeah.
What's that?
Equality.
Okay, looks like
Two
something
parts.
that reflects equality. Equality between what?
Two parts make a whole.
What's that?
Two parts make a whole.
Two parts making a whole. That's what yin and yang is. Yin and yang is balance. You know, there's a balance in creation. Now, a lot of times people look at it and assume it means good and bad. But in Taoism, it's not. Now, it could be creation and destruction, but by its nature, destruction isn't bad. It's just that everything in the world is in balance. Well, that's what you seek, is this balance. That's the Tao. It's a world in balance. And that's what yin and yang is. Light and dark. balance. One isn't superior to the other, they're just different. And so the yin and yang represents this balance that's present in the world. Now, the one who was the founder of Taoism was a person named Liaison. And the name means great one. And there's some real question about whether he was a real person or not. He may have been. But legend, by the legends and the stories, he lived at about the same time as Confucius. So the two are working together, developing in China at the same time. And where Confucius was a person who worked his way up, Liaison didn't. He was in the top. He was at the top of society. Came from a wealthy family. But he became disillusioned, just like Confucius. Confucius became disillusioned when he saw how people were treating one another. That there was corruption, that they weren't respecting one another, that the relationships were bad. Liaison became disillusioned because there didn't seem to be, people didn't appreciate the fullness of the world around them. They were focused on pieces instead of the whole. And so he became frustrated and again left, but he didn't leave to teach, he left to write. And he wrote volumes on his idea of Tao. Okay, and this is what he focused on. He focused on the Tao. Tao is the way. And Tao is not God, but is the way the universe works. Now, if the symbol adopted by Taoists is yin and yang, how do you think he viewed the world, the force of the world, the sort of the essence of the world?
It was equal.
Okay, there was balance in that world. Okay, it's just the natural order. It's the way things are. Not unlike nirvana is to Buddhists, except this is something that permeates creation. In other words, the intention is things are to be in balance. It's when they get out of balance that you have problems. That the goal then of human life, if the natural world is supposed to be in balance, our goal isn't to change the world. Our goal is to kind of flow with it. He talks about human life as being like a river. And when a river encounters, and he would use river as an analogy, when a river encounters a large stone, what does the water do? It goes around. It doesn't stop. It doesn't try to move the stone. It goes around it. It adapts to it. And he says that's what human life is all about. It's adapting to the natural order of things, accepting that flow, getting into that flow and moving. Therefore, your life needs to be in balance. You can't have too much. You can't have too much of anything. Too much of anything throws you out of balance. Now, what would be some of the things where you would want to keep in balance? For a human being, he says you've got to stay in balance. It's when things get out of balance that life becomes more difficult. What would be some aspects in human life that you'd want to keep in balance?
Staying healthy.
Okay, being in, although, health and sickness, he would say, sickness is part of living, and therefore sickness is part of life. Okay, what else would be things that you'd want to keep in balance?
Relationships.
Okay, good. You have relationships. You want to keep relationships in balance. So all relationships shouldn't be one way. They shouldn't all be romantic. They shouldn't all be rational. You want to keep it in balance. You want to have close friends, but also good acquaintances. What else would you want to have in balance? A lot of this is, I think, very similar to what we see in Buddhism. What else do you want in balance? Even something as basic as food. You don't want to eat it all, but you also don't want to eat any of it. You don't indulge yourself, you don't deny yourself. Instead, you kind of live in the middle. Now, living in balance is adjusting to or flowing with the Tao. You're flowing with getting in touch with the natural order of things. So if I want my life to be in balance, if I want to seek out this kind of life, that's where I'm not forcing anything, I'm sort of getting into the flow, where might I look for an example? Where might I look for guidance? In other words, how can I do it? How can I learn to do it? What's going to teach me to live in the kind of balance that's reflected in the world around me?
You look for someone who's educated, or you look to some kind of text.
Okay, that would be way. Confucius would say, how do I live a good life? How do I live a balanced life? Well, I learned the Confucian principles, right? I learn how to relate to other people, right? I learn how to be a good boss. I learn how to be a good employee. Learn how to be a good father. Learn how to be a good son. Learn how to be a good husband. Learn how to be a good wife. Learn how to be good friends. I will learn the principles and the rituals associated with that, and that will give me a good life. Lao Tzu said, that's what Confucian, that's what he taught. Lao Tzu said, no, that's not what you look for if you want to live a balanced life. Now remember, for him, the Tao, the fundamental principle, is what permeates creation. It's all around us. It's the natural order of things. So where am I going to find that perfect balance, that perfect example of balance? I'm not going to find it talking to somebody who's really smart. Because that person who's really smart may be hopelessly out of balance. In fact, that person really might be. Because all he does is think and doesn't feel. His life is grounded in thought and not feeling, and now you're out of balance. So where am I going to, and that becomes a danger, focusing so much on so where am I going to find this example of balance that I might be able to adopt and integrate into my life? Now think about it.
Are you talking about like introspective?
Well, could be introspective. The trouble is we're looking inside ourselves and we may not be in balance. We're looking for guidance within ourselves, and I may be too emotional. I may be too rational. And I may be indulging myself. I may be denying myself. I may be out of balance. So the example I claim has got to be external to myself. Can't trust what's inside. For Lao Tzu, since the Tao is the natural order of things, it is the way, and they're not talking about a creator, because there's no supreme deity here. So it's not like something created it, but rather creation has always been here. The world has always been here. It is a force that kind of brings the world together. It's a force that is reflected in the world. So if I want to find the example of balance, I don't look within. I don't look at other people. Where do I look? I look at the natural world. I look at the world around me. Because that's Tao in its pure form. The balance. And when you look at it, there's life and there's death. And that's not, neither one is good and bad in and of itself. It's just a reality. You know, the natural world becomes the example of balance. You don't have to teach a river to go around a rock. You do have to teach a person to do it, but you don't have to teach a river.
It's like sun and rain.
Exactly. You don't have to teach the world to rain. You don't have to teach creation to rain. It just does it. And that's so, Liaison says, human beings are the problem. You know, we are the ones that get out of balance. The natural world isn't. And so if we want to learn how to live in the kind of balance that fits into this force that energizes all things, to get into yin and yang, to really understand it, we look at the world around us. The natural, not the human created world, but the natural world. So, and it becomes really interesting, you have to knock down some of the Confucian ideas that are human constructs that we have built. You push some of that aside so that you can look at the purity that's sort of underneath. Does that make sense?
I got you.
Okay, that's what he's teaching, you know. Now, 3 tenets of Taoism: compassion, and understand, we can get all of this by looking at the natural world. Compassion, you know, mercy, gentleness, that's what we're striving for. This connection, not as opposed to being aggressive. Frugality. What is frugality? What would
Using your resources good,
using your resources good, as opposed to
being wasteful.
being wasteful. But again, yeah, we're looking at balance, right? So you don't get it and then spend it all. You don't get it and then use it all. Instead, you use it in moderation. You do things in moderation. Again, this is really close to what Buddha's teaching. You know, the fundamentals of Buddhism, that middle way. It's not getting everything, sacrificing everything, it's sort of moving in between. And humility, and that's where human beings get into big trouble. Why is humility so important?
Nobody wants to be made a fool.
Nobody wants to be made a fool. If I am proud, how am I going to view myself with respect to the world around me? If I'm a proud person,
Think you're better.
I'm going to think I'm better,
I'm
right?
above that.
Right?
Be superior, yeah, you're gonna think you're superior to everything.
Okay, and what becomes the problem if I believe I'm superior to everything? What is the fundamental problem in this Taoist idea, this mindset? What becomes the problem if I believe I am superior?
Then you're taking yourself out of being,
And balance.
you know, the normal.
You don't have-
Right, I'm out of balance, I'm taking myself out of the natural world because I'm looking where?
I'm better.
At me, right? So I'm not fitting into, I'm not looking to become part of this flow. Instead of being the river, I'm over on the shore. You know, instead of just flowing, I'm separating myself because I don't need to flow. Okay? This is Taoist. It's fundamental Taoist. So seeking this kind of balance. Now, if this is something I believe, how is it going to affect the way I live? If I accept this Taoist idea, how is that going to affect the way I live my life?
Well, I think you'd feel kind of just go with the flow and maybe not, have all the anxiousness and worries and things that you might have otherwise.
Okay, so you go with the flow, you're not going to be anxious, you're going to work on not being anxious. The more you're connected to the truth, the way, the less anxious you're going to feel because you're going to be more able to just go with the flow. What else?
You're not gonna force issues.
You're not going to force issues. Why wouldn't you force issues?
Well, if you think you're superior, you're gonna shove your ideas down everybody else's.
Okay.
You know,
What's the problem if this is all we have? What becomes the issue? Based on what y'all just said, why might that be a problem for society? Not for the individual, because you're talking about individuals, right? What would be the social problem if this was the philosophy of our society?
There's nobody to lead.
You don't have leaders, right?
Everybody's equal, so there's,
No accountability.
Yeah. And we're all seeking that kind of equality, right? And we're really not looking at one another so much. We're looking almost past one another. And what becomes really interesting is when these Taoist ideas, and we understand that they're growing at the same time. Confucius is writing. Lao Tzu is writing as Confucius is teaching his students. Confucius is talking about this society that is grounded in relationship and grounded in ritual and grounded in mutual respect, which is very kind and generous, isn't harsh, but in mutual empathy and compassion. And Lao Tzu is writing about kind of identifying, seeking balance and identifying with nature. How might these two ideas that when you just look at it seem very dissimilar? Because one is talking about structure and the other one is talking about going with the flow. How might they actually complement one another? In other words, how might both of these ideas become part of building a society, building Chinese society? And they do. How might these ideas complement one another? What can Confucianism contribute to Taoism? The Taoists trying to get into this natural flow. How might Confucianism help a Taoist?
well, they're similar to a point, but because they want to treat others fairly and that would be compassionate.
Okay, that's part of Taoism, right? That's part of being part of nature, that you have respect in nature. The forces, and when we talk about nature, talk about mountains and animals and plants. There's a recognition that everything has a place and a role to play. So that's what creates the balance, is finding that role. What Confucianism does is it gives you a structure for society that enables you to get there. So what ends up happening is Confucianism becomes the guide for social structure, and Taoism becomes the guide for the individual. In other words, as I relate to others in my society, I can follow Confucian rules. I can follow those rituals of etiquette that convey respect, that convey compassion, that convey connection. I can also, as I live my individual life, I can seek that balance internally as I relate to, as I learn from the world around me. So the rules help me live in a society that free flowing helps me live as an individual. And that's what ends up happening in China. So that we've got these two philosophies. And Buddhism too ends up coming in here too. Because Buddhism is telling you not how you relate in a broader society, but how you live as an individual. So you can follow the Confucian rules, but also seek the middle way. You can follow the Confucian rules and seek this connection, this balance in your personal life. So these become really complementary to one another. And so in terms of religion, that's why they can't be exclusive, because you really need both. Where Buddhism is weak, that it really doesn't talk about the individual so much, Taoism becomes strong, Buddhism becomes strong. Okay, so those, now one of the things that separates though Taoism from Confucianism is Taoism has a concept of God. Now, the Tao is not God. The way is not God. It's a fundamental principle. It's the way things work. It's not personal. You know, it's not something, you don't pray to the Tao. You know, the Tao is just the way things are. But in Taoist thought, there are spirits and gods and deities that can help you find that balance. In fact, these are spirits and deities that are part of that natural order. Both black and white, you know, they're in balance too. So where Confucianism doesn't have any really doesn't need a concept of a deity because it's all about relationship between individuals, Taoism does. And even the spirit that enables us to connect with the world around us, it may sort of be personified in persons. So you could have teachers that can help us do that. Okay. So again, that fills that Confucian gap, because Confucianism doesn't have a Taoist has a sense of deity. That is part of the Tao, part of the world in which we want to connect. Okay. Finally, we'll do this in just a little bit, but Shintoism is really, really different, and this is an important. Does anybody? These are Shinto priests, but does that symbol ring any bells? Have you seen that before?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's called Heaven's Gate, and it becomes a symbol. It's one of the symbols of Shintoism. We'll talk about it in a little bit. But like I said, Shintoism is we're going to cover pretty quickly because it's distinctly in its culture. Fundamental beliefs. Shintoism is, Confucianism doesn't care about creation. Taoism, creation is just always there. And it's that spirit that infests creation. So there's no creator in Taoism. There's no creator in Confucianism, or Buddhism for that matter. Shintoism, there is. And there's all kinds of stories about how the world was created. Now, if I am writing a story about the creation of the world, how the universe was created, that sounds a little bit like, Christianity, right? Because in Judaism and Islam, and for that matter, you got Hinduism, they all have creation stories, you know, how the universe was made. The difference between Shintoism and like the Western idea of creation and a creator is in the West, God created out of nothing. It's called ex nihilo. It came out of nothing. Although if you read Genesis 1, it isn't nothing, it's water. According to Shintoism, creation is the result of birth. So creation has a father and a mother. So it is creation was birthed. It wasn't made by one deity. So it was kind of organically made. in their myths, in their creation myths. And this creation that was born from gods was born in the midst of chaos, which is very similar to Judaism, Christianity, Islam. You know, that there was creation, there was chaos first, and order was brought out of chaos. The difference is, in Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, there was a creator God that brought order out of chaos. In Shinto mythology, it was two gods birthing creation in the midst of chaos. Okay, so slightly different. And the gods are kami. These are the gods of Shintoism and creating that. Now that's the gate of heaven. Okay, for Shinto, shrines are a big deal. They view the world as populated by spirits called kami. And kami represent natural things like mountains and trees. It's kind of like the spirit of the spirits, but not a spirit, but spirits that are not inhabiting, but are these natural things. And shrines are the way you connect to that spirit. Now, in Shintoism, oh, and by the way, with creation in Shintoism, the creation was birthed, but in that creation there was one place that had a special status in creation. What place would you imagine had a special status?
Garden of Eden.
Well, it's similar to the Garden of Eden, although it kind of was created organically. Where would that Garden of Eden be? Where would this perfect place be? Do you know where Shintoism is strong? There's one area where Shintoism, and partly because of this, Shintoism isn't a religion that spreads. The one place that was special, the Garden of Eden in Shintoism, are an archipelago of islands. It's Japan. Shintoism was the dominant Japanese religion. And so creation was made, but Japan, the Japanese islands, are superior to the rest of creation. So God made everything, but he gave a little extra to Japan. Now, what would that assumption, as part of the creation, so this is part of the created order. Japan is superior to the rest of creation. Now, what is that going to lead? What might that do to the Japanese, or how might it shape Japanese perspective?
That they're the chosen people.
That they're the chosen people. That they're the chosen people. That they are by nature superior to everyone else. That was fundamental to Shintoism, the birthing of Japan. All right, the shrines are the place where you can connect to God. It's not the place where you learn about gods. It's a place where you connect to the kami, where you're purified. You have this special connection. Okay, a lot of stuff. Real facts. Kami's their deity associated with different parts of the world. Now, they have a very strong system of gods. Fundamental value, tradition, family, love, nature. One of the things that the Shintos believe is that you acquired impurity through things like sickness and tragedy, and that's what the shrines become a place where you can be purified, because it's in the shrine, and that's why in the front there's the Heaven's Gate. The shrines become the connection between the person and God. So when you enter the shrine, you are connected to God in a close and personal way. It's not like a church where you have a service. It's where individuals relate to the spiritual. They kind of cross over into a different world. And it's there where you can be purified from the impurities that you pick up just living in the world, like sickness. You can be purified from it. It's incredible respect for nature. Unbelievable, because it's nature itself, not like the Taoists who look at nature and say that becomes an example we can follow. The Shintos believe that nature represents God. So if I'm looking at the world around me, I'm surrounded by kami, these deities, these spirits that are there in nature, that sort of take a physical form by mountains and trees and all kinds of things. So you want to connect. You connect to nature not as a guide to how to live like the Taoists, but you can connect to nature as a way to relate to God, the divine. A lot of rituals. What you want to do is you want to be in harmony with the gods that are in nature. So that becomes kind of the goal. Now, in Japan, because Japanese viewed themselves, Shintos believed Japan was God's special place, and the Japanese people were God's special people. There was one person in Japan that was above everybody else, and that was the Emperor of Japan. Was viewed in Shintoism, becomes a religious figure in Shintoism, because the Shintos believed that the emperor was the personification of the sun goddess. In other words, the emperor was the son of God, was birth, because this birthing idea is big in Shintoism, was birthed by the sun god. So the emperor is divine. Now, if you're an emperor who's divine, how will the people respond? If they see you as a divine figure, what power do you have over them?
All the power
You got a lot of power. And I'll tell you, historically, that's why we see in civilizations, a lot of times the kings and emperors claim the authority of God. Because if you claim the authority of God, if your population believes it, you got power over them. The Japanese believed that the emperor was the son of the sun god, the god of, because again, these kami are associated with natural figures. The highest is the sun god, and so the emperor was that. Now, what became really interesting, and this was fundamental to Shintoism, that's why kamikaze pilots, would say, that's why they said banzai, because that was a statement of praise directed to the emperor. That's why they would die. They would die for the emperor, because the emperor was supreme, was God. And you die for your country because your country is almost divine. And so that's why this is part of the Japanese. One of the things, though, after World War II, the Emperor of Japan went on the radio in the month of September 1945, went on the radio, and the people of Japan for the first time heard him speak, and part of what he told them was he wasn't God, that he wasn't descended from the sun god, he wasn't the son of God, he wasn't divine. Now, how do you think, if you've lived your whole life believing that the emperor is God in human form, how do you think it felt for them to hear that person say, I'm not? Man, that's pretty dramatic. That was pretty profound. It's kind of amazing, but that's what the emperor did. So Shinto still are around and they still believe that, but they no longer believe the others, but they no longer see the emperor as the personification of God. Okay. Now, again, Shinto really is a God-focused. And this is all good, but how you live is a little bit vague. And so in Japan, Buddhism becomes really important in Japan. Zen Buddhism becomes really important because as they're worshiping their gods, connecting to the kami, purifying themselves, Buddhism gives them a way to live their daily lives. Buddhism gives them an ethical direction on how to live. Same sort of thing that Confucianism does for the Taoist. Gives them some structure. Buddhism gave the Japanese some structure as they dealt with the mythology and the presence of God. Okay, those are the Eastern religions. What do they have in common? What do these three Eastern religions have in common? What would be some things that you see in these religions? Or maybe a better question than that, how do these religions kind of complement one another? Because none of them are exclusive. None of them.
There's no central God.
You don't have central God. You got deities, but you don't have, they're none of them monotheistic. Although in Confucianism, if that's what you want to do, Confucians would say that you could be a Christian and follow the rules of Confucius. So, that would give you kind of structure in your life. But yeah, these religions don't have that one monotheistic deity. How else are they? What else do they have in common, and how do they differ?
One is more rigid and one is more go with the flow.
Okay. Confucianism rigid, kind of the Taoist is sort of going with the flow. Okay. Anything else? What are some of the positives that we as Christians can take from these Far Eastern religions? In other words, what can we as Christians do with them? If anything, maybe there's nothing we can take from these Eastern.
It's like Donna said, with Confucianism about treating people the way you want to be treated. That's kind of like the golden rule.
Kind of what Jesus taught. Yeah, love your neighbor as you love yourself. Okay. So there's some of the ethical teachings we can apply. Anything else that we could take from these religions? And we could throw Buddhism in there. Is there anything we could... I had a conversation with somebody, in fact, not long ago, and she was very concerned that a member of her family seemed to be saying some Buddhist things. And she was very concerned because that would lead her away from Christianity. And it's kind of interesting because you kind of, in some ways, you're on different turf. Because as a Christian, I can get in touch with nature. I can have balance in my life. I can be polite. There are certain things I can show respect. I can even sort of follow that middle way and get myself straight, but still believe in Jesus Christ as the Son of God. So I think there's more from these Eastern ideas that we can not Christianize, but sort of incorporate into our lives, Christian lives. And a lot of what they teach is not contradicted by what Jesus taught. So, anyway, any questions about this? All right. Any questions? Lord have mercy. Thank you so much for indulging me. What's that?
We're going to digest something.
Yeah, absolutely, you should. All right, let's have a word of prayer and then go home. Lord God, thank you so much for giving us this time together, and remind us that truth is truth. And what's good is good, and what's right is right. And if that truth helps us live better Christian lives, help us to integrate some of that truth into our lives. Just because it's associated with another belief system, don't keep us from being afraid. Help us to be what you've created us to be, which are good, loving people. Help us to do that, and if that leads us to some practices that certainly aren't contradicted by Scripture, help us to be willing and able to claim it. We ask this in the name of Christ. Amen. Okay. Thank you.